Hello and welcome back to meetrabbits.org. You can see the weather is turning sunny and bright, and you can't feel it or really see it, but it is getting warm. And this week we are in line to actually see some really high temperatures. So what's on my mind today is heat sterility. So let's chat about heat sterility. What is it? Well, it's a condition of meat rabbit bucks, actually any kind of rabbits. This is not just meat rabbits, although the larger breeds tend to be a little more prone to this than the smaller, but all breeds of rabbits can go sterile in the heat. And who it affects are, again, the bucks. Now, that's not to say that does can't have some issues with heat. They can. But it's not usually something that impacts their fertility in the way that it impacts the fertility of bucks. In other words, them actually becoming sterile. I won't say impotent because they are still able to perform the act, but it usually amounts to nothing if they have gone sterile from the heat. So, first thing to know is when that's likely to occur. So there's different varying factors, and there's no guarantees that your bucks, even if you're having some pretty high heat, no guarantees that they are going to go sterile, but it's something you want to know can happen because that it has other implications for your breeding schedule, for the success of your breedings, your pairings, all of that. So there's a couple of different ranges you'll see talked about, but typically you'll see people say that if they experience 3 or more days of 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, or the equivalent in Celsius, or 5 days of 85 and higher. So again, this is a range. Nothing's really set in stone. And actually, there can be differences according, to individual rabbits. So nothing's going to say that just because the thermometer said exactly 85 for 5 days in a row, that say Sonny's going to be sterile. He might not. Honestly, I don't usually have a lot of issue with it because this barn stays pretty cool and it's shaded in here. We've got good airflow, so they're not out in the direct sun and high heat, but it does happen. And I do think that we had some of this happened last year. I don't know if they were completely sterile, but I do know that like our fall numbers, even when they did breed, weren't great in those pairings. And I suspected that we did have some heat sterility going on. Not a surprise either, because last summer we had twice the number of high heat days as normal, at least twice as many heat waves, which is 3 days of 90 degrees or higher here. And I'm in New England, so when we have heat here in the summer, it tends to be humid, which makes it even harder for them to take. Just like us, the humidity, the high heat and the humidity in combination feels hotter, so that can be a higher stress, and then be more likely to fall victim to it. Some other things to know about it: the factors can vary, like I mentioned. So again, not set in stone, but so let's say you had a stretch of hot days where your days were really hot, over 85, but it was cooling off well at night and they were getting a respite from the high heat and able to kind of regroup and relax, then maybe they won't be hammered so hard by it. Young bucks are less likely to be affected than older bucks. So in 2 ways: one, they're less likely to become sterile, and also it typically will not last as long. They will typically rebound more quickly from it. A young buck will, as opposed to an older buck. So when we say young bucks, we're saying like 3 years and younger, that they just generally have a better time with it, which isn't really a surprise. As you get older, you're more susceptible to the typical stressors, bodies start to break down. So Again, like not a real surprise there, but young bucks do tend to take the heat a little better and tend to be a little less affected by the heat sterility. But I don't want to make it sound like young bucks don't go heat sterile. They do. Again, nothing set in stone, but they do and they can. So, you know, those are the major factors. Now, if we want to talk prevention, there are some things you can do, and you should, but there are also some things that you can't control the weather, so no, you can't control everything. So do your best, and hopefully you'll have the best outcome for the least effects, but definitely just because your bucks go heat sterile doesn't mean you did anything wrong. So housing's a big one. The rabbits need to make sure that they have shade of some sort. If they're in the building, then they already have shade. But even here, like I have to pick and choose some of the areas because of the way the sun comes over. And this is why I don't put cages directly in front of the windows. I don't want anybody directly in the field of sunlight during the day. It's also why my cages start far back where they are, because in the afternoon that sun comes over to the back and it sets back there and that sunlight kind of leaches in here to the floor for several feet. So I make sure that they're pulled back so that in the afternoon, especially in the hot dog days of summer, whoever's on the end isn't in a puddle of sunlight that they can't handle. So shade and air circulation are the two big ones, and keeping them out of direct sunlight. Then also you want to consider the housing itself. Wire cages in this instance are much better because there's better airflow. The air can get in them, they can cool off better, especially as opposed to being like in an enclosed wooden hutch or a hutch that's mostly enclosed or enclosed on a lot of sides. You don't get good airflow and the heat builds up in there. And then house your bucks in the coolest part of the room. So this is one of the coolest parts of my room because it doesn't get direct sunlight anywhere. It's kind of in the middle of the floor-ish, so it gets really good airflow there. It's across from a couple of the windows, so good airflow, circulation, and cooling. And again, there's no direct sunlight ever hitting them, so that's one of the cooler parts of my rabbitry, and that's where the bucks are. So everyone's rabbit area or rabbitry is going to be a little different. You're going to have to kind of look around and see where your cool areas are and where your best areas might be for your bucks. There are some other comfort measures that you can take, that you can try. Lots of people have lots of different suggestions, and I'm sure probably some of you are going to have some to add to the list. So feel free to pop those in the comments for me and for others to see and share and learn from each other. Some of the more popular ones are frozen ice bottles. So this would literally be making up bottles. Usually people use like empty soda bottles, freeze them in the freezer, put them in the cage, let them lay against them, or probably what's actually more effective is if you have fans, which are another comfort measure you can use. That get some airflow over them. It can kind of radiate some of that cold off of those bottles and help cool, kind of a impromptu air conditioning unit, if you will. So again, fans are another one because they can increase the airflow and help get some better air circulation in, get some breeze on the rabbits. I think probably people see different results if it's actually feeling better, alleviating some of the heat and feeling cooler. Then, that's probably better than if they're just moving around the same temperature of warm air. But just like us, it can be some relief and might be worth trying for you. Some people run misting systems where they're misting a fine mist of water to help evaporate. And some people will actually spray, like just with a small spray bottle, come in a couple times a day when you're in the highest of the heat and mist the rabbit's ears, because the ears are the radiators of the rabbit. So they don't sweat. The way that they cool down is by trying to transfer heat out of their body through the blood vessels in the ears. My one word of warning with that would be make sure that if you're using any of these, especially like the misting or the spray bottles, that you're not creating a new problem if they're kept too wet. You know, you could cause some skin issues. You could cause, you know, maybe invite in flies, could end up with some fly strike. Like, I don't know how major of a problem that is, but I know that you'll see people who have had rabbits that kind of use their own water bottle to drip on them, or you know, lay parts of their body in the water bowls, which I've never actually seen that, but or even up against the ice bottles as they condensate. If they're doing that a lot of the time, and you have consistent wetness on the fur, that does have a potential to become a problem. Some people actually use full-fledged climate control, in other words, air conditioning. Me personally, I'll tell you that's out for me. That's off the table. To be honest, even my house doesn't have air conditioning. It's a sore spot with my husband and my kids, but air conditioning for rabbits, you know, one thing you don't really need to be doing is doing the up and down thing with the rabbits. So if you're not going to kind of keep it at a steady, consistent temperature all summer long, if you think you're only going to use that air conditioning sporadically, you're probably better off doing nothing at all. But that being said, I, again, am in New England, in the northeast part of the U.S., and people are in all different locations all over the world. And how high your heat gets, how stressed your rabbits get, what they have to contend with is going to be different than what I have to contend with. So that is a personal decision. Some other kind of comfort measures are to reduce handling during that time of day. You just don't need to stress your rabbits out. You need to let them just lay out, chill out, cool out, let them pant, let them dissipate that heat. They don't need to be getting worked up, jumping around, running around. They need to just be able to lay low. So unless you're in here dealing with something that is an essential need, especially during those hottest hours of the day, leave them be. Take good care of them. Check their water 3 times a day. You know, feed them obviously as normal. But otherwise, kind of leave them alone. And then reduce whatever other disruptions you maybe can reduce. You know, if you have something that's new and strange, say young kids that they're not used to or something, or animals they're not used to, running around, being in the rabbitry, those aren't the days to let them in there messing around, getting the rabbits worked up. Again, just try to keep things as calm, cool, and collected as you possibly can. So that does it for most of the comfort measures on my list. And now let's talk about more of a management side of things. So personally, one of the reasons I keep rabbits is that they are so sustainable. You know, I don't, like I said, like with chickens, I don't have to constantly buy in chicks every time I want to raise some meat for the table. We just breed a rabbit. You know, they do what rabbits do, and we have meat. So the kind of low, easy care and manageability of them and sustainability of them is are the biggest benefits to me. So that means I don't want to have to do things like input a lot of extra utilities and whatnot. And that also means that I am breeding and selecting stock to my climate. So in my climate, they may have to deal with sometimes as far down as 20 below in the winter. And they may have to deal with, we do occasionally get up to 100 or over in the summer. Usually we stay mostly in the 80s. But definitely I plan on a couple of heat waves every summer, a couple of stretches of 90, and that's enough to knock them out and make them heat sterile. But again, individual rabbits can perform and be affected differently. So if you are, and this would be over time, this isn't necessarily something you're going to just quick select for in a quick rotation, but over time, if you're finding a buck that doesn't seem to go heat sterile or just barely or something, then you may want to select toward that trait. Same way, you might want to select for winter hardiness and other traits that way. I kind of would lean more towards the heat tolerance because most of them don't have a problem in the winter. It's usually the summer that's much harder for the rabbits than the winter. And then as far as like timing your breedings, if you know you need rabbits during the summer, then plan out your breeding a little bit, schedule it out a little bit so that you are avoiding when they might be heat sterile. So this could be like, you know, like I'm going to try and get one more breeding in here. It's early June now, and I would like to get one more breeding in here before this typically becomes a problem. So by mid to late June, I might start seeing some of that. And some of these years are not kind of staying in their lane. The climate is all over the place, kind of has a mind of its own. So you got to do the best that you can do. But typically for me, if I can breed by the end of June, I shouldn't have bucks that are heat sterile yet. And that will give me that one more round of kits. And then if they do go sterile in July and August, which is when they're typically going to go sterile for me, then I'm not set too far back. And then again, you know, going back to the young bucks, rotate your bucks out maybe even at a younger age than you think you need to. So you might get 5 years out of a breeding buck. I've done it. But that may not be the best thing to do from the perspective of heat sterility. So by, you know, retiring these bucks, say by 3 years old, again, they're more likely to rebound better and less likely to be affected to begin with. So now let's assume that your buck went heat sterile. What do you do about it? First of all, just know it's a temporary condition. This is not a critical life-threatening condition. Heat stress can be if your rabbits aren't provided properly for. And, you know, if you're in an area where you get some really severe heat, again, you know, it's sad to say, but there may be only so much you can do. We do the best that we can do. So do the best you can for your rabbits. And other than that, know that it is a temporary condition, and the best defense and reaction to rebound from it is actually breeding. So the University of Michigan states on their site that bucks that breed frequently are less likely to go sterile, even in high heat. But by frequently, they mean 2 times a week. So a lot of us backyard breeders, that's a lot of breeding. I kind of doubt most of us are breeding that often. But the more regular of a schedule that you can keep, the more frequently you can use your bucks, the better off it's going to be. You might stave off heat sterility, and even if you don't, that is actually the solution. That's how you bring them back after they have been heat sterile, to kind of clean out the pipes, get them working again, and get that sperm count back up there. Also keep in mind that heat sterility can kind of be sort of partial. So you may have some successful matings, but you may have very small litters resulting from them. And that's okay. Try not to blame that too much on the buck or the doe. During that time of year that follows heat sterility, try to keep it in mind when you're talking about retiring any breeders or thinking about culling or making those decisions. Just pay attention to what time of year it was, what your heat was like, and if the problem is really the buck or the doe, or if it is just that you need to rebound from a hot summer. So again, it's a temporary issue, you know, good selection, the best you can do for housing, and to a reasonable degree, climate control, water, of course, is important, and just good basic care for your rabbits. But again, best thing you can do is to keep breeding on as frequent a schedule as you can. Frequent breeding is kind of always the answer to reproduction in rabbits, to maintaining good reproduction. And then it is the answer again to coming back if they do have heat sterility, just getting them going. Now they should come back between 60 and 90 days. A young buck should get over its heat sterility in under 60 days. An older buck can be as many as 90 days. So 2 to 3 months. It shouldn't last longer than that. If you have sterility issues that are lasting longer than that, and that's assuming that you haven't had new bouts of high heat, because I know some of you, and even here, like, we can get some late heat waves. Well, if you get a late heat wave, like, that can kind of reset the clock. So, after you think that it's been long enough, you've tried breeding, and they're still not producing litters, that's when you need to think about whether they are either low production or completely sterile. One final thing to mention is that being heat sterile doesn't mean they won't attempt to breed, and it doesn't mean that they won't have fall-offs. They can still have fall-offs, look like they did everything right, go through all the paces, look like they're fertilizing the doe, and then there still might not be any kits, because the problem is that it's the sperm that's dead. It's not the animal that's dysfunctional. It's just that the sperm died off because it was too hot. So again, something you need to keep track of, something you need to keep in mind. They will try and breed, and you should try and breed if it's the right time of year for you trying to get litters on the ground, then you should be doing that. But don't be surprised if you have some unsuccessful matings at that time. And if you're going to mate, if you're going to breed them during the summer, do it in the early morning, in the coolest part of the day. Don't add to their stress and their heat stress by making them undergo what's we all know is a pretty strenuous physical activity for them. Don't make them any hotter and more uncomfortable than they need to be. Do that early in the day, and then let them chill out and rest the rest of the day. So that is my talk on heat sterility. I hope that everybody is still staying cool and comfortable, but from glancing around the rabbit farms, I suspect some of you are already getting a little hot under the collar. But I just hope that everyone's rabbits do well, thrive, and we will get through the summer and come out on the other side ready to breed. And with that said, I'm going to sign off and go take care of this guy here who apparently wanted to dump his feed into his water today. Except, now that I think of it, there was one final thing I wanted to mention, sorry. And that was overcrowding in the cages. So your bucks are, they shouldn't be kept in a crowd situation anyway because of fighting and unplanned breedings and all of the things that go along with that. But, try to give a little space so that you maintain that airflow. I did this morning, like I said, because I'm expecting 87 degrees by Wednesday. We couldn't get out of the 50s last week. This week we're going to hit almost 90. So I know that I've been talking about and showing you, along with the champagnes and that litter of Californians that I had that are weaning age. They're 5.5, not quite 6 weeks. I wanted to give them a few extra days, maybe another week with mom before I took them out. But then I saw this weather forecast. So in anticipation of that, I did wean and move everybody this morning, with the exception of this one little Californian who I actually don't love the looks of. Seemed to have kind of a pasty butt. Watching that one a little bit, and maybe not in full-blown diarrhea yet, but I'm watching for it with that one. And I continue to watch those champagnes. So far, knock on wood, we have not had any more deaths, but again, a couple of them had a little bit of a pasty butt. So I'm watching that, and continuing on with lots and lots of hay, probiotics in the water, limiting the pellets with the oats in it for now, and seeing how this goes and seeing if we can hopefully get through this weaning period. And then I separated some of the litters by sex. The smaller litter that only had 3, I gave them each an individual cage, but next to each other. This is the litter that I kind of have the most concerns with. So I didn't really want to wean them yet, but I needed to get bodies out of the does' cages, especially for Rose, because she had 7 in there, and the quarters were getting tight enough. And I had to make a judgment call, and my judgment was that they've probably gotten most of what they're going to get from her. I haven't been seeing anyone nursing on anyone for a long time. So I moved them out because I think that the heat stress was probably going to be more of a risk than them coming out of the cages and being weaned. So I was hoping that this will, we've got a couple of cool days, not cool, but, nicer days. In the 70s, we've got a nice little breeze outside today. So the air's really good. So I'm hoping that maybe they'll take these next couple days to adjust before that high heat hits, and that maybe we can still keep ahead of some of these issues, and we'll just have to see how it goes from there. So that's a little blurb on those guys, but it also does tie into issues of heat stress and heat sterility, again, because just keeping things separated away, everybody not too crowded. Again, don't house bucks together anyway, but keep as little body heat exchange going on in those cages as possible. And I'm looking at Rose because this is, like I said, she's the one who had the 7, and she tends to kind of run a little hotter, I think, than the others. In other words, she's one of the first ones that I see panting when it is warm out. So I did want to get those kits out of there, and I'm just hoping that this goes okay. But I do think they're at a point where it was going to go the way that it was going to go. I think they've gotten what they can get from mom anyway. So again, that's the end of the talk today. Thanks for being here. If you have anything, to add or any questions, pop it in the comments, and we'll talk again. Come on over to meetrabbits.org. There's more on this subject there.